Nothing is manlier than rejecting an RMA request for a melted 4090 power connector and blaming it on user error. Seeing this reported by WCCF Tech, their source seems to be Quasar Zone, which I believe is a South Korean outlet, and that might explain why many of you may be unfamiliar with Manli as a, wait, they make Nvidia GPUs? Who's that? I think they serve more of the Asian region, more so than, I'm familiar with in the United States. But, just like other board partners like MSI or Asus make their cooler model versions for Nvidia GPUs, so does Manli. And Manli has apparently rejected an RMA request for a burnt power connector. And again, has blamed it on user error. I'm really hoping the next generation of NVIDIA GPUs, this is no longer a problem. I know that they did update the connection a bit, so I think the sense pins were shorter so that you are less likely to get current flowing through if you don't have a real solid connection. And that's what they mean by user error, because apparently the official story is that these don't have issues if you have them fully seated. But either that isn't actually true, or they're just so poorly designed that they're easy to not fully seat, or they come loose after being fully seated. I don't know, but these stories just keep popping up. Anyway, so I thought I'd just throw that out there, and don't like to see that from Manli rejecting that RMA request. When reading further into the story, the user has claimed that they even offered to pay for the full cost of the repair, but the Manli just didn't want to deal with it and said user error. So that's not good to see. Now, speaking of the next generation of GPUs, I reported in my last video there was some disagreement in the leaks which GPUs we would be getting in 2024, whether it would be the 5090 or the 5080. With Copite 7 Kimi coming down on RTX 5080 should be released first, and that would be the GPU we would be getting in 2024. We have a reply to that from AGF, which is at XPA GPU, saying that to be exact, they should be announced at same time with availability separated by a few weeks. So in other words, we'll be getting the 5080 and the 5090 near the end of 2024 / beginning of 2025, separated by a few weeks. None of that sounds all that surprising, regardless if you had any crystal ball people on Twitter. And also, the other latest rumors for the 50 series is we're seeing rumors about the coolers being tested, ranging from 250 watts to 600 watts. I dug into the exact source here, which appears to be from Bench Life, and they say that according to information from a familiar cooling module manufacturer, Nvidia has already conducted relevant tests and verification on cooling modules for the Blackwell GPU architecture's GeForce RTX 50 series graphics cards, evidently preparing for the launch of the GeForce RTX 50, although there's no specific timeline. Currently, about 4 plans are underway, with power ranging from 250 watts to 600 watts. Now, 600 watts sounds like a really big number, but keep in mind that, the 4090 did go up to, I think, 450 watts, and then you could have, even more overclocking potential beyond that. And that, speaking of power connectors, I think is rated at 600 watts, whether you feel good sending 600 watts through it. In other words, none of this sounds crazy out of line in my opinion, from what we saw in the 40 series, and none of this, I think, really tells us all that much anyway. But in my last video, I talked more about the rumored specs and everything, so we'll just have to see what comes of it. But just expect to be getting more 50 series leaks as we get closer to the end of the year, as more people within the kind of chain of supply and cooler model manufacturers and all of that start to hear things and all of that. No, maybe you should be tossing your whole x86-based computer out soon if, this Snapdragon X laptop launch goes well. Now, I'm really curious about how this goes because really I just want to see, how do ARM CPUs perform on Windows these days? Because we've seen Windows try to run on ARM in the past. Apparently, the leaked information is that this should do a much better job. I'm really curious if it really does. And also, maybe normal applications run well. Can you game on these things? I'm curious how this goes. But we are seeing leaks of Snapdragon X CPU-powered laptops from Dell and Lenovo leaking out ahead of launch. I'm not going to go into too much detail on any of this because I don't think we really know all that much about them at this point. And like I said, I'm mostly interested in how does the ARM system actually perform in Windows, running applications and all of that. Maybe it's good for browsing the web and browser-based stuff, but can we do anything serious with them? Question mark. Because we know Apple has had a lot of success moving to their ARM-based M chips. Speaking of which, we see Apple introducing the M4 chip featuring 10-core GPU and 10-core CPU and GPU. And, they make their claims about 50% faster CPU than the M2. Notice they're comparing it to the M2, not to the M3. So maybe they're thinking that's more of what you would upgrade from. You're not upgrading every generation, or maybe they just like bigger number better. So we get bigger percent number if compared to M2 than M3, so do. But I never know what to make of Apple's performance claims anyway, since a lot of times they're just like a curve on a graph with no axis or something, Anyway, and they're claiming up to, and again, up to is that famous marketing word of if it did it somewhere in some test sometime at some place, or we can at least claim it did, then we can say this and just say up to, because it did it once somewhere somehow. Anyway, and up to 4 times faster GPU than M2. What does that mean? I don't know. We'll have to see. Now, in this, again, with laptops looking at moving to ARM, what are the big players, like AMD and Intel doing on x86? Well, we do see AMD readying their Ryzen AI 165 Strix Point APU with 10 cores. We've been seeing leaks about this. As far as the specs, now this one, again, reported by videocards.com, all my sources in the video description, but they're getting their information from Golden Pig Upgrade, who has leaked things accurately in the past, releasing some specs. Now, these specs do line up, again, with some previously leaked specs I've already reported on in a previous news video about Strix Halo and Strix. Looking at some potentially big numbers on these things, which is very, very cool. And I'm interested to see how they perform. The main thing we're seeing here is kind of the naming scheme. So this one's being leaked as the Ryzen AI 9 HX170. And we've also seen a leak for a Ryzen AI 165. Now this one didn't have any like HX on it, but again, it could be a leaker just leaving that off or it not being reported there. But it's looking like we're having a 12-core 24-thread variant and a 10-core 20-thread variant. You would assume that this being a monolithic die, this would just be a cut-down version of that one. And again, that the R880M GPU, kind of, it's integrated GPU, would be a 16 compute unit RDNA 3.5. And again, these will have XDNA acceleration. So curious to see what we get out of all of this. And again, especially if we start seeing these bigger ones claiming like a 40 RDNA 3.5 compute units and things like that, and what we could get out of that, again, if all of these leaks and rumors end up playing out. Now, another interesting thinking of, again, of the mobile form factor is the handheld PCs. And with the Steam Deck, it seems like the main competitor to the Steam Deck right now is the ROG Ally. But the ROG Ally had some problems. One issue it was having was with its SD card readers having, high failure rates, not working properly, as well as battery life maybe not being as good as what you might get off of like the Steam Deck OLED and things like that. Now, it's looking like this, while this isn't an official announcement, it's looking like we're getting information here of a pretty big update to the ROG Ally. One thing is this version looks to be black. And again, the battery life, the claim here from Asus SVP Sean Yen to The Verge is we're not looking at 30 to 40% better battery capacity. We're looking at way more than that. So apparently they're claiming big improvements to the battery life, which, that's a huge deal in this kind of form factor. So that's pretty cool. Overall, it's looking like it'll be the same 7-inch screen, which is variable refresh rate. That's one of the coolest things about the ROG Ally, in my opinion, is the variable refresh rate screen. Same kind of processor, but again, apparently a much better battery. larger SSD form factor, more than 16 gigabytes RAM, heavier than the 2023 version of the ROG Ally, which might make sense if you're putting in a bigger battery. And again, check this out. The SD card slot moved away from the heatsink. So apparently there may be a change that solves the SD card issue. And a black shell design this time, and all we know about the price, it will be higher than $699 at launch. So it does sound like it will be expensive. But this does seem like it's shoring up a lot of the issues with the original ROG Ally. So again, getting to be a pretty crowded space, but I really like my Steam Deck, and I like to see this kind of form factor being pushed. So really excited to see what we get out of that when it launches. And speaking of AMD hardware, like we did earlier, and again, AMD hardware running the ROG Ally as well, we're seeing that AMD has fulfilled an open source promise, releasing full MES documentation for RDNA 3 GPUs. Now, this might not mean anything to you, and honestly, I don't think this means much to most people. This goes back to an issue where basically there was an AI startup called TinyGrad that had wanted to use AMD GPUs for their projects, but apparently had issues with not having proper access and documentation for certain parts of how the GPU works. And apparently this is AMD open sourcing more of that information and making that easier to work with their micro engine scheduler. Again, this isn't really going to be affecting gamers and all that too much. What might affect more gamers is Lossless Scaling's Universal Frame Generation 2.0 is out now, improving efficiency and noticeably reduces artifacts, at least according to this headline. Now, I still haven't tested Lossless Scaling's frame generation. I have reported on it in previous news videos. So basically, this is a not very expensive, but it is a paid app on Steam. And in addition to offering some image scaling options, which I have tested and reported on in the past, it a while back added a frame generation feature, which can basically run on any game that's in windowed mode. It does need to be in windowed mode. And then it inserts generated frames, sort of like AMD's driver level version, fluid motion frames, although it's not the same thing. It's kind of that idea where the game doesn't have to support it. It will interpolate frames, which again does have a latency impact and does introduce image quality artifacts. I guess the big deal with the 2.0 version of this release is that it's claimed that a couple of things. One is that it's improved the processing so that it can work at a lower base frame rate. They're advertising you could use the minimum recommendations out to 30 or 40 FPS for 1080p or 1440p respectively. So 30 FPS 1080p should apparently work as the minimum spec, and 40 FPS for 1440p, with 60 FPS and higher recommended for an optimal experience. So still 60 FPS or higher baseline before you generate frames for optimal, but they're reducing the minimum requirements. And they're saying that there is a noticeable reduction of common artifacts such as motion ghosting, edge distortion, and image blurring. In cases where artifacts persist, it's advisable to increase the base frame rate. But they did say that there's a trade-off, because with the increase in, decrease in artifacts, meaning the increase in quality, there's also an increase in the load on the GPU placed on this, up to 1.5 to 2x depending on the resolution. Again, the more pixels you're dealing with, the harder this is to do. So therefore, they've also introduced a performance mode that performs, it basically is more like the performance level of the previous 1.1 version, although they are saying it still maintains some image quality advantages over the 1.1 version, but runs quicker than this new 2.0 version. All of this sounds interesting. I would like to test this out at some time, and maybe this 2.0 update's a good time to do it. We'll have to see when I have time to actually test it out, but some people have been asking me on the channel. So cool stuff. It's certainly not going to be as good as like an actual built-in DLSS 3 or FSR 3 implementation that has a full game integration, but still could be a cool thing to check out for games that don't support that. Now, an update that I'm very happy to see, if I'm understanding this correctly, is that VESA has announced, or VESA, I think, anyway, whatever, has announced display HDR 1.2 specifications with tighter performance requirements. Here's what I'm getting out of this. A lot of monitors claim to be HDR monitors because they support accepting an HDR signal. However, they don't actually display a high dynamic range. They don't have really good contrast ratios. They don't go down to really dark blacks. They don't have a wide color gamut. They don't have all sorts of things that you would actually want if you're actually going to consider something HDR content. And I think this has a negative impact on the public perception of HDR in the PC space, because I think a lot of people think they're using HDR and they're really not. Their monitor is advertising HDR and it's accepting an HDR signal, and you can turn HDR on in your games, but it might not look very good because your monitor's just not doing a very good job at HDR. So if I'm understanding this update to the 1.2 version of their specifications, it's that they have tightened up what it actually takes to earn this HDR label, at least the HDR 1.2 label. Now, there's still a variety of standards like 400, 600, etc. But if you look at it, it seems like they're adding in a bunch of like I said, better requirements. It looks like there's more contrast requirements, new black level requirements, new color gamut requirements, and all sorts of things. Now, I'm not an expert on all this kind of display stuff, and you could read more into this yourself if you want to. I'm hopeful that this will help it be harder for monitors to claim to be HDR when they're not. And that could then improve the public perception of HDR on PC. Because HDR can be great, but a lot of people aren't getting what they, a real HDR experience. Now, speaking of clarifying, requirements and standards, we're seeing that Microsoft is testing in a, preview version of Windows using mega transfers per second for memory speed when monitoring it in Windows 11 Task Manager. Do they have any images of this? Here we go. Right here, mega transfers per second. Now, right now, if you open up your Windows Task Manager and look at your RAM speeds, it's probably reported as megahertz rather than mega transfers per second, which has always annoyed me because the actual RAM speed measurement should be mega transfers per second, because RAM can transfer information, not necessarily lining up with the clocks. It's not necessarily like a one-to-one thing. So the proper thing is mega transfers per second, and it hasn't reported that in the past, which is annoying. So anyway, this seems like a good change, although it seems to be just in a preview version of Windows, but hopefully it makes its way to the, the final version. Now, I'm also seeing videocards.com reporting that Minis Forum is releasing a upcoming mini PC that is Intel-based, using an Intel Ultra 9 Core 185 CPU. I'm still getting used to the new Intel CPU names. With a built-in touchscreen on the front, as well as a video camera and Oculink support, all of which are pretty interesting, and this sounds pretty high-end. I've actually had Minis Forum reach out to me offering a review sample for this unit. And I have accepted it because I do occasionally review mini PCs, and I haven't tested out any of the Core Ultra 9 CPUs that have the ARC graphics in them. So I'm really interested in putting this head-to-head against one of the AMD mini PCs, probably one of the recent ones from Minis Forum as well that I've reviewed on the channel, to kind of put those head-to-head and see how they stack up in gaming. But overall, this is kind of a cool idea to have like the system stats monitoring on the front, as well as working in a webcam into the mini PC format, which I haven't seen before. I'm not saying none of them have it, but I haven't seen that before. So kind of interesting. And again, they also have the Oculink connector, which is better for connecting compatible external GPUs if you're going to do so. So pretty cool stuff. And like I said, I probably will get a review out on the channel. Looks like they launch on May 20th, which I believe is also the review embargo. So we'll see if I have my unit and test it out in time for that launch date. But like I said, it looks like I will be getting a review sample for that, and I'm pretty excited to test out one of the Core Ultra 9s and see how it does in gaming. Speaking of gaming performance, Unreal Engine 5.4 has been released recently, and WCCF Tech is reporting on this, but it looks like their information is coming from a recent Digital Foundry video testing out the performance changes for Unreal Engine 5.4. And I did go ahead and check out this Digital Foundry video, and it's very, very interesting. So basically, there's still some performance issues with 5.4. But this video was really cool, looking at the city sample demo, which was used as kind of the foundation for the Matrix Awakens demo, which was one of the big Unreal Engine 5 announcement things. And it was massively CPU limited and had all sorts of shader compilation issues. And Unreal Engine 5.4 seems to perform significantly better, although still not perfect, not great. And anyway, if you want full details on that, I highly recommend checking out this Digital Foundry video on the topic. And they test out some of the other like visual changes and things like that, because there are also some changes in the lighting and reflection systems. Some good changes, some seemed a little less stable on the lighting and things like that. But with how many games are going to be using Unreal Engine 5 in the future, it's good to see we might have at least improvements in CPU utilization issues and shader compilation issues. But like I said, it didn't seem to be fully solved, which was disappointing to see. Now, in other game news, we're seeing Fallout 4 is getting another update with new graphics options, improvements, and fixes releasing next week. It's also apparently the #1 selling game in the UK after the success of the Fallout show on Amazon, which is interesting. But all I thought when I saw this is, man, the guy's working on the Fallout, what is it, the Fallout, is it London? Geez, I'm forgetting the name of the mod. But the huge mod that was about to launch right when we got the first update to Fallout 4, and then that breaks compatibility. We're now apparently getting another one that I'm guessing will further break mod compatibility. So, like, okay, one thing, it's like, okay, kind of nice to see updates to an old game, but a game that's so reliant on mods, and breaking mod compatibility can certainly be a frustration added into that. Now, in other interesting news, we're seeing of like old games hitting #1. Again, Fallout 4, you know, not super recent, but apparently selling real well right now. Sea of Thieves hitting its launch on PlayStation 5 in Microsoft's bid to move into more multi-platform support on a lot of their titles, Sea of Thieves being one of them. It was very successful from a sales standpoint, seeing that Sea of Thieves was April's most downloaded game on PlayStation 5 in Europe and hitting 3rd in the US. So looking like sales looking good for Sea of Thieves on PlayStation. Now, PlayStation hasn't moved as much to the multi-platform from a console perspective, but they've been moving into more PC support. And the rumor is that the next PC game will be getting announced will be God of War Ragnarok. Now, I recently finished this on my PS5, and I would be really excited to see it on PC. Because I have a feeling it would still run pretty well, because the performance mode ran very well on the PS5, and so compared to PC hardware, if we get a decent port, this could be very performant and very visually impressive, and just a good game overall. So I'd definitely be excited to see that making the move to PC, and I'd certainly be interested in testing its performance if we get it. But speaking of games that we already know are coming to PC and are coming very soon, we'll be seeing Ghost of Tsushima coming to PC, within the next week, right? However, not only do we have an Nvidia driver update, but I also want to mention the controversy, because remember, Helldivers 2 just had massive pushback for the PlayStation Network requirement. Don't forget that Ghost of Tsushima is, at least for its multiplayer component, going to require a PlayStation Network account. Now, you can play the single player without it, so at least you have that. And compared to Helldivers 2, which is pretty much entirely multiplayer, you know, that's less of a big deal for this type of game, but I just thought I should still mention that. However, it's also a bit of a different scenario where you're not kind of suddenly dropping that requirement after people have already bought the game and been playing without it for months, right? So that's a little bit different, but still do keep an eye on that if that's an issue for you, and that could also affect the availability of the game worldwide, because as we saw with the Helldivers incident, not every country, in fact, many countries, right? Over 100 countries don't support PlayStation Network. So that could be certainly an issue with this game. But again, it looks like the single player version won't require that. And also this should be the first game getting a PlayStation Network, a PlayStation overlay on PC, which would get you access to things like your friends list and achievements. And like you can earn PlayStation trophy achievements through playing the PC game, but it would be linked to your PlayStation account. So interesting stuff. So I don't know, it's looking like Sony's gonna face a bit of, growing pains on trying to bring their PlayStation Network to the PC platform and figure out just how much of that the PC player base wants. Because it certainly looked like Helldivers 2 was definitely a step too far. Now, speaking of games getting some pushback and maybe not succeeding, we're seeing reports that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League contributed to a $200 million lower EBITDA for WB. And if you're wondering what the heck is an EBITDA, I don't think I even said that right. Anyway, whatever. That apparently is the estimated before, right? It's, geez, do they have it in the article? I knew this acronym at some point. I think it's before, here, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Anyway, basically, compared to last year where they had the massive breakout success of Hogwarts Legacy, Suicide Squad was decidedly less so of a breakout success, if we want to put it at that. Now, speaking of things that are maybe not a breakout success, how about every game that's launching on Xbox Game Pass? So we're seeing this headline: Xbox Game Pass causes every game launching on the service to badly miss its sales goals. Now, to be clear, that's not a direct quote from Microsoft with a bunch of numbers to back it up. This appears to be a new from a new post on LinkedIn by Brad Hildebrand, who has been the senior public relations manager for 343 Industries, The Coalition, Compulsion Games, and others up until this month. And he was highlighting how big of a problem the subscription service is, saying that every game that launches on the service badly misses its sales goals. And that is certainly interesting. It's very interesting to think about what this all means, because Xbox Game Pass could possibly have paid out better if its subscription numbers would skyrocket. And I think Microsoft was counting on having big exclusives like Starfield, drive a huge wave of subscribers, but it didn't. Redfall was another exclusive flop on the platform. So if subscriber numbers aren't going up, how does Microsoft, let alone third parties, make back the money, right? Because Microsoft's spending $70 billion acquiring studios, but if they don't drive Game Pass subscriptions, and being on Game Pass means they don't sell well, what does that mean? Because, for example, I think Microsoft is really struggling with whether or not games like Call of Duty should be on Game Pass. Because if they're on Game Pass, it could drive subscriptions, which could be a good thing. But Call of Duty prints money, at least when people have to buy it. So if they put it on Game Pass, then people don't buy it, then, what does that mean? And especially, like, does it really end up driving enough subscriptions to make that worthwhile? Anyway, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the industry right now. I'm generally just kind of curious how the AAA game development world will look 5 years from now. Like, it just feels like a lot of companies are just like on the edge of failure. If AAA games don't just sell massive amounts, how do they earn back the cost? Because they're incredibly expensive to develop. But it's not going badly for everybody. We're seeing reports that Capcom, for example, registers a new record of net sales, and it's the 7th consecutive year of record profits. So not every game developer is struggling right now. So Capcom, it looks like a huge part of their success has been continued strong sales of their backlog. For example, Monster Hunter World 2 apparently sold 2.8 million units in the last year, adding on to the 25.3 million total unit sales, right? Monster Hunter World Iceborne adding on 2.3 million units this year, contributing to the 12.6 million overall. And again, you can see this down the line with Monster Hunter and Resident Evil games, where they are continuing to add in millions of unit sales, or over 1 million unit sales on a bunch of them, despite this not being the year of their release. So games with, strong tails to continue to earn revenue seem to be working for Capcom. Now, why are they getting that and maybe a lot of other publishers aren't? Or I'm assuming they aren't if they're struggling. I don't know. Different type of games, different, these games are mostly good. Anyway, I thought all of that's pretty interesting. Hopefully you guys found today's video useful and or interesting. Huge thank you to subscribers, commenters, viewers, channel members who click the join button to directly support the channel financially. Huge thank you for doing that. You'll notice no sponsor spot in today's video, so let's say it's sponsored by today's channel members. Thanks for clicking on that join button to directly support, and totally understand that not everybody can afford to do that. Absolutely fine, but huge thank you for those who do, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.